Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Weekends with Amit. This week, we have a deep subject, and the subject is quantum spirituality. We have a wide variety of audience all over the world who are very interested in spirituality. Many of them are active practitioners, and they believe that a new worldview is not only essential, but it is critical for our humankind as a species to survive on this planet. And in this subject, Professor Amit Goswami has been in the front runner seat for a very long time. His first book on this, The Self Aware Universe, made a huge splash in the community, and it kind of bridged the gap, or the science and religion, which were at odds most of the time, a lot of time in the past, those gaps were bridged. And now, with more evolved ideas and more evolved wisdom, we have a new book written by Professor Amit Goswami and Dr. Valentina Onisor, our panelists for today. Welcome to both of you. And this talk will be on quantum spirituality. And before we get into the talk, I would like to show the book to our audience. Just a moment. So, for all of you, this is the book, if you can say it, Quantum Spirituality. This gives a very, very deep understanding of the similarities between the so called opposite sides. There is no opposite sides, everything is same. All you have to do is to read this book to know. This book is available both on Amazon as well as Flipkart. And if you have any queries on the book, you can always reach us directly at info@amitgoswami.org, or visit our website www.amitgoswami.org. We will be more than happy to help you out with any queries. Now, coming to the main section of the talk. As usual, I will first go to Professor Goswami. And this would be a very basic question. In fact, no question at all. Is that what prompted you, and of course, Dr. Onisor together, to write this book?
Well, okay. We both have been spiritual practitioners, and this has made a major difference in our life. And in fact, my discoveries came partially because I was a spiritual practitioner. The thing that most scientists are obscured about, the reason that they do not understand the depth of consciousness, is, to bluntly put it, because they never experience expanded consciousness, the ability to really include others, not just say it. Faking, all of us can do, I love you, etc., we can say, but expansion of consciousness that people feel or can feel escapes many, especially the intellectuals, the scientists. So my goal was always, when I came to realize that the conventional science is in a wrong direction, was to find ways in which I can truly investigate consciousness. In other words, I can include some of the things that the spiritual traditions are saying instead of right away rejecting it, as materialist science has done. By one stroke of their thinking, that matter is everything, they have eliminated everything about spiritual reality. The expansion of consciousness, consciousness itself included, except as a pretension. Consciousness itself is now assumed as an experience without any truth, without any causal consequence. This is the situation I started with. And of course, I was very fortunate. The spiritual practice gave me spiritual experiences directly, experience of expansion of consciousness, and that made it easier. And then the next question naturally opened up. Next question was that, of course, I knew from my own experience why scientists, generally speaking, and ordinary people keep away from spirituality. Because the idea of spirituality is always to give up the ego, or at least this is what seems like the idea is to most people, give up the ego, kill the ego, and then the quantum self, which we now call quantum self, spiritual traditions don't call that. Spiritual traditions call it the reality. Then only the reality of God or oneness of everything will shine through. But this is very hard to swallow. The reason is if we give up the ego, how can we even investigate anything? So there must be something basically fundamentally wrongly driven or wrongly interpreted anyway about spirituality. So this motivation gradually developed into the even stronger motivation when I realized that, okay, religions are not really talking about everybody. People, ordinary people, should never give up their ego. They are talking about people who are ready. For example, in Buddhism, Buddhist First Noble Truth is that life is suffering. But life is suffering for whom? Only who are ready, who have already a detachment towards worldly affairs. And for them, I realized that the question, who am I really, is very significant. They want to shift their experience of consciousness from the ego into that deeper state that we originate from. And this process at some point involves giving up the ego, but only at some later stage, not in the early stage. Early stage, one needs the ego because one has to be creative about spirituality as well as worldly activities if you want to investigate what is of value, what is of purpose to us. In other words, creativity is for everyone, both outer engagements and inner engagements. And the more I realized it, the more I realized also that the stuff, the objects that we intuit, they are the basic because they begin the process of creativity, the archetypes. And very soon I analyzed the professions, human civilization, and I found all civilization is about 9 archetypes. These are abundance, power, love, goodness, beauty, and then truth, justice, and wholeness. And finally, self. And each of the archetype really has to be investigated in the pretty much the order I told them. Although the beauty archetype is something that people investigate at any stage of the human civilization, as you know. But the other archetype really has a certain order in which they have to be explored. And this is all have to be documented. So my years and years were spent in the documentation of how the archetypes express themselves in the human beings. When that was completed, finally the question came, so what can we say to spiritual people who are often misled by this misinterpretation of what these traditions are really saying, that you have to kill the ego, you have to keep away from worldliness, everyone, because worldliness is all about ignorance. Not at all. Worldliness can be exploration of the archetypes. It's not at all ignorant. It brings satisfaction, better happiness, and more and more spirituality, because spirituality is the key to happiness. Spirituality leads to expansion of consciousness, and it is happiness. It's just a different kind of happiness than pleasure. We are not very used to this kind of happiness, but anybody knows that if you talk to a loved one, your consciousness expands and you feel brighter, right? Happy. That's happiness. It's just not an explosive form of happiness that we get from eating or sexual pleasure. So this has to be emphasized, and a science has to be developed. A process has to be developed. Very soon, I discovered that the whole history of spirituality is full of people struggle establishing such process, although they never dare to be very explicit that they are breaking away from the traditional self-realization emphasis. So the tradition of yoga, I understood the meaning of it. The great Sri Krishna, he started this movement, wrote a beautiful book, or rather dictated to his disciples. There was no printing press in those days, and it was memorized for a long time, that tradition, and then finally probably found explicit publication in the 4th century or thereabouts, when printing was available of some sort, not printing press of today, but writing was already available. Bhagavad Gita. And then Patanjali wrote the great book, Yoga Sutra. Those are the two great ones, both in the ancient times. And more recently, these two went moribund in India, because India's spirituality became more and more down with all the aggression that India had to put up with from other cultures. Anyway, history aside, Aurobindo in the 20th century revived this idea of yoga, and he even tried to integrate all the yogas into a cogent exploration of wholeness. So the idea that we had, Valentina and I, is certainly not original, because Aurobindo already had this basic idea. But because we had one part of the game that Aurobindo did not have, which is the discovery of the right science, so we could do it much better than Aurobindo could. So in that way, we wrote Quantum Spirituality. That's the history. And then I leave it to Valentina to explain what it contains.
Yeah, so this is what he has to say. Now, it is your version of it and how you look at this book, the contents of it, and your original feelings associated with those contents, and if those contents may help the audience.
So it is not a difficult book. If you look back, you will see that Amit's books previously, they were a bit more difficult. And in the last years, you will see a lot of transformation in the way the concepts are presented. And this is especially because there was made truly progress towards what we call this archetype of wholeness. And I was personally very happy to discover this real path of transformation that the quantum science is bringing forth, and the common sense that comes with it. I was for more than 30 years into science and spirituality, and quite deep in both of them, enough to see that besides a lot of treasures which I discovered in both of them, of course, in medicine, but also in spiritual practices, there was also a lot of dogmas, of course, and a lot of questions, regarding various types of behavior, which are not really as harmonious as you would aim for, And then, of course, we know that transformation, it's not an easy process, right? And it worked during this trip, obviously, that's what we are here for, process of transformation, which is continuous actually. And again, just to underline that the whole idea that the quantum spirituality is added is about this shift on the traditional practice, where is too much emphasis on the self archetype and really kind of escaping the world, and the ego as well. Ego is treated as a bad thing, and instead focus on any of these archetypes, again, which was mentioned by Amit before, which are part of our dharma, why we are here for in the first place, personal dharma. And these archetypes, you can call them also divine attributes, if you like. And so again, the beauty is that it's described truly stages of transformation, where you aim to eventually embody these archetypes, even if they are highest thinking, which you will never truly be able to contain, right? But still, they will give you enough inspiration so that you shape your life accordingly, right? And then eventually take these quantum leaps, smaller or bigger, and again, gradually make this shift of character. And then we speak about soul making, related to the supramental and so on. Yeah. So again, eventually, we concentrate on the archetype of wholeness. Yeah, you will hear more and more about this term, which is consisting of integration of all the dichotomies. Of course, again, it's easy to say and it's not so easy to do, but when you do it, then the highest levels of harmony, of happiness, of health are achieved. And this is done both at the universal level and archetypal. So you will discover in this book truly a whole world. I'm very happy that we wrote this book. It was also the time when we really put the first thoughts and feelings for creating this University of Transformation that we have now. We're very happy to have that. So it was coming in the same time. All these beautiful ideas were coming together. And again, so the idea is to also develop authenticity, of course, not that strong egotistic ego, right? And also you will understand that negative emotion-based circuits, for example, they don't just go away, yeah. But when we discover, when we are more and more authentic, which again is not happening just like that overnight, this kind of healthy ego will never use all these, for example, all these negative emotion-based circuits for his own benefit, yeah. So you're not using manipulation, for example, or displaying these tantrums, for example, or enforce upon somebody something using these negative emotions for the ego's purpose. So an authentic person will not do that. And also we show, for example, how we need to keep still the reward system. The brain is reacting with rewards or punishment, right? And increasing happiness, and of course these states of expansion of consciousness are satisfying also the rewards brain circuit. You have to understand why it's given in this book, and then later on the quantum brain, of course. And the fact is that the world needs such transformed people. And of course, like Amit said, so in the end, when you're tired of all this, eventually tired it's not really that kind of tiredness, but you did enough, then you get into what is called vairagya, this passion or that detachment, which has to come anyway in the way, and then you go towards the self archetype, but not just because you are running away from the world, even before assuming that dharma, which was yours, is yours. So ultimately, again, the purpose is to learn to act, live, and even earn your livelihood in expanded states of consciousness. And then, of course, it's a beginning. In the book, you will see more about creativity and how that works, which is, of course, you will see that in all the other books. Starting from understanding what's happening with that real interconnectedness which exists through our unconscious, but which is existing, however, only in potentiality. And about the paths, how to actualize this connectedness, which are very beautifully described. These paths to reconnect to the one from the separateness that we live, which are, of course, let me just call them, and with this I'll end my little talk now. So non-locality, which is connection through signal-less communication. We can get to that the most easy is the part of the heart and through meditation, for example. And then the second one would be tangle hierarchy, connection through circularity of relationships. And then the third one is discontinuity, these abrupt quantum jumps from the domain of space and time to the domain of interconnectedness without going to the intervening space. Yeah? So when we connect and access this ground of being, you get also access to its power, and it's the freedom to choose. Okay, and of course, together with that, it's all that joy, happiness, all that comes with being the whole, and in a state of inspiration as well. Krishna?
Thank you, Valentina. So there are several things that you mentioned, and also Professor Goswami mentioned about the archetypes, different types of, as you just mentioned, this the major aspects, tangled hierarchy, quantum leap. Now, from a lay reader's point of view, who is interested in the subject, and this reader has many options on the table to read a number of books. So this would be a question to Professor Goswami, that as a reader, as an interested reader, why this book will be my choice?
Well, frankly, I do not discourage you from reading any book by any intelligent and sincere author who has experiences of spirituality. Only avoid those books which are written from clearly intellectual pursuit. In other words, the philosophical treatises on consciousness, they usually are not useful. And here I use the word philosophy only as intellectual philosophy. Philosophy has a different name in spiritual tradition. In India, it's called by the Sanskrit word darshan. Philosophy is philosophy based on intuition, and that's pretty much the way we see as quantum science of spiritual process, creative process. Where intuitions begin the process, archetypes begin the journey, and then comes to fruition using the creative process. And we already mentioned the archetypes, and that's what gives you spirituality, expansion of consciousness, happiness. It is indeed a journey, one way of looking at it as a journey of increasing happiness, increasing wholeness, increasing expansion of consciousness, that ability of staying in that inclusivity all through your life, in your interactions, in your relationships, in your approach to social good. So this is really the fundamental point to be made. If a book satisfies this even partially, for example, there are many good books by transpersonal psychologists who are also into the experiential aspect of it. No psychologist is a proper psychologist if he or she is purely intellectual, purely philosophical. So there is completely agreement with our approach, and those transpersonal psychologists or those yoga psychologists who also emphasize personal growth, emphasize archetypal exploration. The only reason that we suggest quantum spirituality is that if you are interested in the quickest path, because we really have some additional insights that quantum science is giving us. These additional insights will be lacking in the completely psychological approach without the scientific part of it. It requires some understanding of how the brain works, some understanding of how quantum reality manifests in us. Without that understanding, it is impossible just by mere thinking and some intuition to figure out what we need to do. For example, one thing that is lacking in Aurobindo's work is the paying suitable attention to emotions. Although he mentions it, he certainly has the desire to integrate it, very clear from his writing. But in actual following it up, he's constantly facing the difficulty that he doesn't have a science behind him. Even the explanation of what emotions is not very clear from his writings. Of course, he knows the basic idea that feelings are vital energy, experience of vital energy, but that's about it. The intricate way the human organs bring us the software, the intricate way the chakras develop, that is completely a result of our quantum approach. We now have an understanding how chakras work, how they can be awakened, and so forth. No mythology is needed like Kundalini rising and Kundalini awakening, all these myths that go about, that it is so hard, so rare. No, nothing like that. It's just a simple application of creative process in the vital dimension. He agreed that we are not very familiar with it. We are just learning, but Chinese are already very experts. Not only they are familiar, they are very experts about it. The Qigong tradition is very highly developed in terms of raising Kundalini. So none of these mythologies are worth anything much. Using quantum science, we explicitly include all the processes, all the experiences that you now can put in the grist for the mill. The mill is the very difficult one from practicing point of view, from actually exploring and getting results, because creativity is not easy. But the process can be stated quite simply. This is what we teach in our transformational education, and you can even get a PhD while being transformed today. It is that much codifiable, and we have codified it, and this is what the big virtue of quantum spirituality is over any book available of this ilk. Kishanu?
That was an excellent description. Well, what I can say from my own humble reading of the book is that my suggestion to would-be readers will be to employ your whole being, not just the brain, while reading the book. And this is meant for the whole being. Brain is a part of it. Being intellectual and suppressive, not necessarily is a great idea, contrary to the normal understanding. Now, with this, we come to the end of this particular episode. We will see the responses of the audience and we will decide whether there could be another episode on the same subject that we will let you know in due time. And what Dr. Goswami or Dr. Oniswar was saying, how would it like to be transformed and getting a PhD in the process? Not many people has both these things together. Not many places can offer both these things together. Thankfully, with the initiative that Professor Goswami and Dr. Onisar has taken over the last many years, we have now a proper degree course, a fully accredited degree course in quantum science of health, prosperity, and happiness. Now, this is a course you can find out about it on our website www.amitgoswami.org. Or if you have any queries, you can always send us an email and we'll be very happy to answer that. We are looking forward to a lot of participation from people. And the more you learn about these subjects, you will know what you were missing. That's a promise. Thank you very much for watching. See you next week.